You ever have one of those moments where you're surrounded by people, all smiling, eating, laughing, and yet you've never felt more alone? That was me, standing in my own backyard during my daughter's birthday barbecue, flipping burgers on the grill while family buzzed around like nothing was wrong. It was supposed to be a good day, normal, familiar, but something about Kim's voice from across the yard sent a shiver up my spine. She was holding court with a few of our friends and her sister, wine glass in hand, when I caught her saying it, clear as day. Let's be honest. This marriage runs on my terms. John knows that. She laughed like it was a joke, but there wasn't a hint of humor in her eyes. And everyone around her, they just smiled along, nodded like they'd heard it before. I don't know if she meant for me to hear it. Maybe she didn't care. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. Something subtle, but irreversible. I'm John Wright, 45, husband, father of 3, vice president at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. I've got a house near Lake Michigan with a wraparound porch and a wife who, from the outside looking in, would seem like a partner in every sense. Kim's always been smart, assertive, organized to the point of obsession. We met in our 20s when we were both still figuring life out, but over the years, she figured it out faster and with more precision than I ever did. Somewhere along the way, I went from her partner to her project. It wasn't like this in the beginning. She used to admire my spontaneity, the way I could go with the flow. But over time, go with the flow became let her lead, then do what she says, and eventually don't ask questions. I don't even know when I stopped pushing back. Maybe it was after the kids came. Maybe it was when she took over the family calendar and started color-coding our lives. At first it felt helpful, practical. But bit by bit, I started to feel like I wasn't living a life. I was performing in one she scripted. That night, after the guests left and the kids were tucked into bed, I sat out on the back porch nursing a beer while Kim came out to join me. She had her "we need to talk" tone dialed in before she even opened her mouth. "I hope you're not upset about what I said earlier," she began, not sounding even remotely sorry. I was half joking. I didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the dark water beyond the trees. "John," she said, her voice tightening, "don't be dramatic." That word, dramatic, she used it often. Anytime I showed emotion, anytime I questioned her choices or, God forbid, disagreed with her in front of someone else, I was being dramatic. She kissed me on the cheek, patted my shoulder like I was some obedient pet, and went back inside. I sat there long after the porch light clicked off, thinking about what she said. This marriage runs on my terms. Maybe it always had, and maybe I'd let it. But that didn't mean it had to stay that way. The next morning, I woke up before Kim, just like I always did. I made the coffee, fed the dog, and started breakfast for the kids. The usual routine. But something about the way I moved felt different. Like I wasn't doing it to meet her expectations anymore. I was doing it because I wanted to. That might not sound like much, but when you've spent the better part of a decade walking a tightrope in your own home, even the smallest shift in balance feels like a rebellion. Kim came downstairs an hour later, still in her robe, phone in one hand, rattling off reminders for the day like always. "Don't forget, we got the Ryans coming for dinner Saturday." "Oh, and I signed us up for that couples budgeting seminar next month." I didn't respond, just sipped my coffee and watched her float around the kitchen like the CEO of our lives. Eventually, she looked up from her phone, brows knitting together. "Did you hear me?" "Yeah," I said calmly, "but I've already got plans Saturday." That was the first crack. The first little fracture in the system she designed. And the best part? I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. It was like a switch had flipped, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a passenger in my own marriage. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to storm out. I wasn't going to give her a reason to call me irrational or unstable. No, I was going to change the game. Silently. Strategically. And on my terms. At first, she didn't notice. That's the thing about people who are used to being in control. They don't immediately recognize when it starts slipping away. It doesn't hit them all at once. It creeps in, slow and quiet, like a leak in the foundation. You don't see the damage until the floor gives way beneath your feet. The next couple of days, I didn't change anything major. I still went to work, still helped the kids with homework, still made dinner on Tuesdays like I always did. But I stopped asking Kim what she thought about every little decision. I didn't tell her when I went for a walk after dinner. I didn't double-check if it was okay for me to meet a buddy for lunch. I just did it. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I didn't ask for permission. One morning, while she was still in her bathrobe, I told her I'd be late getting home. "Oh," she said, tilting her head. "What?" "Grabbing a drink after work with Josh." I replied casually, flipping through the news on my phone. She blinked, caught off guard. "When did you plan this?" "Yesterday," I said. "You didn't say anything." I didn't think I had to. That was the first moment her eyes lingered on me longer than usual. She didn't argue, but she didn't smile either. I could almost hear the gears turning behind her calm exterior. Kim had always relied on me being predictable, cooperative, compliant. Now, I was none of those things, and I wasn't even being hostile about it. And that's what unsettled her most. There's power in calm. People don't know how to respond when you stop reacting the way they expect you to. It throws off their rhythm. Kim had always been the conductor of our household orchestra, tapping the baton and expecting every instrument to play on cue. But I'd stopped playing along, and I hadn't said a word about it. The subtle rebellions became routine. When she asked me to look over the weekly grocery list, I told her I'd already gone and picked up what we needed. No consultation. When she texted asking if we could host her sister's family over the weekend, I replied, "Already have plans." No explanation. And when she reminded me about the budgeting seminar she signed us up for, I simply said, "I won't be attending." Not a single raised voice. Not one insult or argument. Just quiet resistance. It confused her. I could see it. She'd tilt her head like a bird, try to read me, trying to find the emotional hook she could pull to reel me back in. But I didn't give her anything to grab. The kids noticed too, though I don't think they understood it. They just saw Dad smiling more, laughing with him at breakfast, dancing like a dork in the kitchen when their favorite songs came on. That used to be me, before life turned into a calendar filled with appointments and reminders dictated by someone else's standards. One evening, I was making spaghetti with my youngest daughter, Mia, while Kim stood at the counter scrolling through her phone. Mia had marinara on her cheek and giggled when I tapped her nose with a sauce-covered spoon. "You seem different lately," Kim said, without looking up. "How so?" I asked, stirring the pot. "Less involved." I shrugged. "I'm still doing everything I always did. I just don't feel the need to check in for approval anymore." She looked up then, lips pressed in a tight line. "Approval?" "Yeah," I said, smiling down at Mia. "You know, like I'm an employee waiting on a performance review." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. She was still trying to figure out if I was joking. I wasn't. After dinner, while the kids watched a movie in the other room, Kim and I loaded the dishwasher in silence. Usually, this was the time she'd bring up the weekend agenda or suggest new projects around the house. Instead, she said, "Is something going on with you?" I didn't stop what I was doing. "Nope." "You sure? You've been different." "I've just been thinking about a lot lately," I said. "About balance. Boundaries. That kind of stuff." She shut the dishwasher a little harder than necessary. "You could have said something if something was bothering you." I finally turned to her. "I did. You just didn't hear it." There was a long pause. She opened her mouth to respond, but closed it again. And she just walked away. That was new. Kim didn't usually walk away. She challenged, questioned, demanded. But this time, she left without getting the last word. And that's when I knew the shift was real. I wasn't fighting for control. I was reclaiming my peace. And without saying it outright, I had started sending a message that things weren't going back to the way they were. Kim thought the structure she built around our life was solid, unshakable. But I found the cracks, and I was done pretending I didn't see them. The first real test came on a Thursday evening. Nothing extraordinary about it at first. I was getting ready to head out to meet an old friend from college, someone Kim never particularly liked. Said he was immature, directionless, a bad influence. That always made me laugh. If anything, he was the one person in my life who reminded me who I used to be. I was pulling on my jacket when Kim came into the room, towel around her neck, fresh out of the shower. "Where are you going?" she asked, drying her hair like it was just a routine question. "Meeting Brian for a drink." She paused mid-motion, then turned slowly toward me. "Brian?" "Yeah, he's in town for a few days." There was a moment of silence. Then she said, "You didn't mention that earlier." "I know," I said calmly. "Didn't think I needed to." Her eyes narrowed just slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but I knew her tells by now. That was one of them. She was calculating her next move. You could have at least told me. What if I had plans? You don't, I said. You just said earlier you were catching up on emails tonight. That didn't sit well with her. I could tell. The way she set the towel down on the dresser, slowly, like she was grounding herself. So that's how it is now, she said, voice cooler than before. You just come and go as you please? I turned to face her fully, zipping up my jacket. Isn't that what you've been doing for years? She didn't answer right away. Just stood there, arms crossed, the towel forgotten. I'm not trying to fight, I added. I'm just going out for a drink. She stepped forward then, her tone shifting to something almost pleading. John, what's going on with you? It was the first time in years she'd asked me that, and actually sounded like she meant it. I considered my response for a moment, then said, I'm just tired of asking for permission to live my life. Her face barely changed, but I could feel the energy shift. That hit her. She didn't yell, didn't argue. She just stood there, watching me like she was looking at a stranger wearing her husband's face. I'll be back later, I said, brushing past her. As I reached the front door, she called after me. So this is who you are now? I stopped, hand on the doorknob, and replied without turning around. No, this is who I've always been. You just stopped noticing. Then I left. The bar was half full when I arrived. Brian was already there, 2 beers in, still the same sarcastic wise ass I remembered. We didn't talk about Kim right away, but eventually, as friends do, we got to it. You look different, he said, tapping his glass against mine. Lighter, like you finally pulled the knife out of your back. I laughed because it wasn't far off. When I got home later that night, the house was quiet. Kim was in bed, lights off, door closed. Not waiting up, not calling or texting, just gone from the equation. But it wasn't cold or tense. It was still, like a line had been drawn, and we both knew it. The next morning, everything felt a little off. Kim barely looked up from her coffee. She didn't ask how my night went, didn't mention Brian, didn't say much at all. And that silence? That was new. She usually filled every pause, narrated every plan, gave direction even when none was needed. But today she was quiet, observing, processing. I could feel her studying me the way she used to study spreadsheets, like I was a problem to be solved. When I left for work, she said, I'll see you tonight, in a voice so neutral it was impossible to read. I just nodded and walked out the door. But inside, I knew something had changed. Not just in me, in her too. Because for the first time, I hadn't followed the script. I hadn't reassured her, hadn't softened my tone, or wrapped my independence in an apology. And she had no idea what to do with that. She was losing control, and she knew it. But more importantly, she knew I knew it too. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When people feel their grip loosening, they don't let go. They squeeze harder. The silence between Kim and me didn't last long. A few days, maybe, long enough to make her uncomfortable. Long enough for her to realize that something real was shifting. And once that realization sank in, she did exactly what I expected. She tried to pull me back in, but not with kindness or reflection. Not with a conversation. No, Kim's version of reestablishing control came dressed as concern, wrapped in subtle jabs, and just noticing comments. One morning while I was shaving, she stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching me in the mirror. You've been different lately, she said, tilting her head like she was observing a painting. Different how? I asked, not looking away from my reflection. I don't know, distracted, distant, secretive even. I rinsed the razor and met her gaze in the glass. Or maybe I'm just finally showing you who I am. She smiled then, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was tight, clipped at the edges. You sound like someone going through a midlife crisis. There it was, a jab wrapped in a diagnosis. I'm not buying a motorcycle, if that's what you're worried about, I said, drying my face. She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. That was the beginning. From then on, the comments came in waves. Soft at first, almost imperceptible. You've been moody lately. Did you forget to take your vitamins again? I read an article about men and burnout. Maybe you should talk to someone. It was all disguised as care. But it wasn't. It was control, just dressed up in language that made it harder to push back against. And still, I didn't bite. I just nodded, smiled politely, and did exactly what I wanted. When I started coming home later, she'd be waiting in the kitchen, pretending to scroll through her phone. "Didn't realize you'd be out so long," she'd say, voice light but loaded. "Yeah," I'd reply, hanging up my coat. Tom got away from me. No guilt, no over-explaining, just facts. She hated that. The harder she tried to pull, the more I let the ropes slide through my fingers. She started scheduling things for us again, but this time I didn't just go along. When she added a wine tasting to the calendar, I deleted it and replaced it with dinner with Mike. She saw the change and cornered me about it in the hallway. "Are we not doing the tasting?" "No." "Why?" "Didn't feel like it." "You could have told me." "I just did." She stared at me, stunned into silence. It wasn't the words that got her. It was the lack of apology. Kim was used to me smoothing everything over, making sure she felt heard, respected, centered. I used to play that role, so, well, I forgot it was a performance. But now I wasn't playing, and that terrified her. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, she brought 2 glasses of wine into the living room and sat beside me. "We should talk," she said, handing me a glass. I took it, sipped it, and waited. "I know things have been weird lately," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I just feel like we're out of sync." I nodded. "Yeah, that's fair." She looked surprised that I agreed so quickly. "I mean, it's not like I'm blaming you. I just think we should be more intentional again. Like we used to be." I set my glass down. "Intentional's good, but I'm not going back to how things were." That threw her off. She blinked once, twice. "What do you mean?" I said, turning to face her fully, "I'm not interested in going back to a version of this marriage where I disappear." She bristled. "I never asked you to disappear." "Didn't have to," I said quietly. "You built a system that made it easier if I just stopped having opinions." "That's not true," she said, her voice rising. "It is," I replied, calm as ever. "And the moment I stopped playing along, you started calling me moody, unstable, selfish." She looked hurt, but also like she was calculating, trying to find her footing. "I'm not trying to control you, John." "But you are," I said. "And I'm not playing anymore." The room went still after that. She didn't argue, didn't cry, just sat there, processing the reality that whatever power she thought she held was slipping through her fingers like sand. The next few days, she tried different tactics. Being overly sweet, acting aloof, even provoking small fights, hoping I'd snap and give her something to work with. But I didn't give her anything. No anger, no tears, no chase. Just me, steady, present, unshaken. And in that silence, something incredible happened. She started unraveling. Money had always been Kim's favorite terrain. She never said it outright, but her tone changed whenever the topic came up, like she was talking from podium, not across a dinner table. She prided herself on managing the big picture, and for years, I let her. It was easier that way. She had spreadsheets for everything: vacations, bills, grocery spending. At one point, she even made a budget for my birthday gift to her. That used to be our joke, her obsession with planning, my easygoing attitude. But now, I realized it wasn't funny. It wasn't harmless. It was control disguised as competence. So, I decided to change the rules. It started with one quiet afternoon when I logged into our joint accounts. I hadn't checked in a while, another habit I'd fallen out of, but something told me it was time. I wasn't surprised to find that Kim had moved most of our savings into accounts she controlled. Technically still joint, but only on paper. She'd shifted money around, adjusted names on statements, filtered everything through her email address. I stared at the screen, remembering something she'd said a while back. "You don't really need to worry about the finances. I've got it under control." At the time, I was grateful. Now, I felt like I'd handed over the keys to my own life and walked away. That evening, I brought it up casually while we were making dinner. "Hey," I said, slicing onions, "we should revisit our finances." She glanced up from her recipe app. "Why?" "No reason," I said. "Just want to be a little more hands-on again." Her brow furrowed. "That's random." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm allowed to be interested in our money, aren't I?" She smiled, but it was tight. "Of course. I just thought you preferred not to deal with all that." I did, until I realized why. Over the next week, I quietly made some changes. I opened a separate checking account in my name. Nothing dramatic, just something mine. Then I redirected my paycheck to that account. I left enough in the joint one for bills and household expenses, but the rest? That went where only I had access. It wasn't about hiding. It was about balancing. When Kim checked the joint account a few days later, she noticed. She didn't mention it right away, but I could feel the tension building. Finally, one evening while we were folding laundry, she said, "Did you mess with the direct deposit?" "Yeah," I replied, folding a towel. "Moved it to my own account." She stopped folding. "Why would you do that?" "Because I wanted to." She stared at me. "That's not how we do things." "Maybe not how you do things," I said, "but it's how I'm doing it now." Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She stood there for a long moment, as if recalculating something in her head. "We're supposed to be partners." "We are," I said. "And part of being partners means not having one person quietly control everything while the other one just follows along." "You're acting like I've done something wrong." "I'm not acting," I said. "I'm just taking responsibility for my side of the fence. That includes my money." She shook her head in disbelief, then dropped the towel onto the pile and left the room without another word. Later that night, she tried again, this time gentler. "I just don't understand what you're trying to prove," she said from across the bed. "Nothing," I said. "This isn't about proving anything. It's about participating. You've always trusted me with the finances." "I still do," I said. "But I'm no longer okay with trusting you instead of trusting myself." She didn't respond. For the next few days, she hovered. Double-checked things she never used to double-check. Made comments like, "Just let me know before you change anything else," or, "It'd be easier if you kept me in the loop." But I didn't ask for permission. I didn't explain. I didn't reassure her. Because the truth is, I'd been in the loop for years, her loop. And now I was building my own. And that terrified her. One afternoon, I came home to find she'd printed out a full spreadsheet of our accounts, complete with color-coded tabs and projections for the next 6 months. It was sitting on the kitchen table, waiting for me. "This is everything," she said, gesturing to the binder like it was an offering. "I want to be transparent." I looked through it, flipping slowly, page by page. It was immaculate. Of course it was. "Looks good," I said. "Thanks." She waited, expecting more. Some gesture that I was ready to return to the old dynamic. I didn't give her one. That night, I logged into our account again and moved the rest of my savings. Not to punish her, not to hide it, but to remind myself I had a say. I always had a say. I just stopped using it. Until now.